This is the face of a woman who allegedly just gave birth to a 14-year-old's child. And not only that, the boy she allegedly sexually assaulted once dated her teenage daughter. And not only that, her teenage daughter once brought this boy to a middle school dance, and the suspect in this case allegedly was the chaperone. This is a disturbing case that has our heads spinning, but it's one that the people in her community have been demanding the authorities investigate and do something about for months. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, we are just beginning to digest what authorities in central Illinois have laid out in court documents about a woman who allegedly sexually assaulted her teen daughter's 14-year-old ex-boyfriend and had his baby. Now, that is in some ways just the beginning to this story. So let's talk about it. This is the person at the center of this, Robyn Polston. She's in her 40s. I'll show you how people in her community, even people who know her very well, were calling for her to be arrested for months before it happened this week. Now, this story played out in Washington, Illinois, a city about 3 hours south of Chicago near Peoria. The town is roughly 16,000 people, so this is the kind of place where word can travel fast, and it appears that word definitely traveled fast starting in February of this year. Now, this is the probable cause affidavit laying out what Polston is accused of doing. And I'll just say it, buckle up because this is quite the read. The document says on February 6th of this year, a police officer took a report about Robyn Polston having just given birth to a baby boy the month prior. Now, a week later, a detective got a copy of the birth certificate for Robyn's baby, and the document had the 43-year-old's name on it, but on the line where the father's name goes, it was blank. So the detective then makes contact with Polston about a week after that, and of course the big question is, who's the father of her child? Polston reportedly told the officer that the father's name was Brian. He was a man in his 20s, and she hadn't seen him since the birth of the baby boy. The detective then took a DNA sample from Robyn and the baby. Now, Polston was already a mom. Police say she had at least one other child, a teenage girl. And like what many parents do of teenagers, Polston once chaperoned a dance in 2023 where her daughter went with a boy. Police say after that middle school dance he went to with Polston's teenage daughter, the boy moved out of the area, but he returned to Washington, Illinois the next year. And it was in April of 2024. And then in June of 2024, he kept visiting to meet with someone who he referred to as a friend. Now, the boy then moved to that area in central Illinois in August of 2024 to live with the person who his family says he was calling, quote, a friend. This is all according to police. Now, you might be picking up on who the friend, quote unquote, friend is in this case and where this is headed. Police searched the boy's phone and allegedly they found explicit pictures on it. Now, those pictures were allegedly of the mom of his ex-girlfriend, his former dance chaperone, 43-year-old Robyn Polston. Now, we don't know how many pictures exactly were on the boy's phone that were explicit in nature, but according to police, the affidavit refers to them as, quote, a large number, including images of Polston allegedly sexually assaulting this boy. This is so sick and so disturbing if all of this is true. Then police took a DNA sample from the boy, and allegedly, that sample came back showing that the 14-year-old boy is indeed the father of the baby that the 43-year-old Polston birthed in January of this year. The 43-year-old Robyn Polston was arrested on November 3rd. She faces 2 counts of criminal sexual assault and 2 counts of child pornography. We put Robyn Polston's name into truthfinder.com, and here is her profile that came up. You can see she's 43 years old. Also, we were able to find some address information for her, and it looks into any sort of criminal past she may have. And from what we were seeing on Truthfinder, she has never faced the kind of allegations that she is facing in this case that we're talking about today. Our partner TruthFinder is the powerful public records search service that we use to do research here at Law and Crime. It's a useful resource. You can plug in a name, you get address information, criminal history, and more, and it can give you some peace of mind. TruthFinder is one of the largest public records search services in the United States, and with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone in your area, and that can include looking up registered sex offenders who live near you as well. So stay informed, stay safe, search public records with TruthFinder at truthfinder.com/OTC. Court documents allege that Robyn sexually assaulted this boy between March of 2024 and the end of May of 2024. Then there's another count alleging sexual assaults occurring between March of 2024 and February of this year. That would be around the time that she gave birth to the baby. Now, on the child pornography charges, there's 2 counts of that, and the documents say that Polston allegedly, knowingly, created the images between March of 2024 and February of this year. Now, according to local media, Robyn has allegedly been enabled by people close to her. I'll talk about that in just a moment. There have been plenty of voices in her community who have wanted to see her arrested for months for what she allegedly did. Look at this post here. This is by a man who says that he used to be a brother-in-law of Robyn Polston. Back in April, in a post that is still posted on his page publicly, it's the pinned post, he writes, quote, "Reposting just because it's absolutely disgusting that Robyn Polston has not been taken into custody yet. If this was a male, it would have been game over from day one. Also, she's still going to her kids' sporting events around boys that seem to be the age that she's into. Now I am forced to take my son to his first baseball game of the season against her son's team, and she will be able to sit in the stands and watch all these boys play ball. She should be in jail. She is a predator. Shame on the Illinois state's attorney for letting this drag out for months, especially when there is a physical baby that she had with a 14-year-old. The system is broken." Now, according to 25 News Now in Central Illinois, prosecutors allege that Polston had the victim use burner phones under fake names so they could communicate. And when it came to her bond conditions, prosecutors said that she couldn't be trusted to stay away from the victim if she were released pending trial and pending wherever the direction of this case goes. Prosecutors also argued that Polston's mom and sister were, quote, enablers, and they can't be trusted to keep Polston away from the victim in this case. Now, the judge ruled that Polston needs to stay in jail as this case is pending. Her next court appearance is expected on December 4th. Joining us now to talk more about this is survivors' rights attorney Chris Klotz. Great to have you here on Law and Crime. This story, and I know you have, as part of your line of work, you see cases like this in a lot of ways, but just what stood out to you? Because there's just so many different shocking kind of components to this and what this woman, Robyn Polston, is accused of.
Yeah, so Chris, thanks for having me today. The one thing that stands out on this case to me really is all the cases where there are victims of childhood sexual abuse are always shocking. The one thing that really kind of stands out to me is that there was a child that was a product of this relationship, and secondly, and maybe less significantly, there's the event that this was a friend of her daughter, which is even more kind of a personal betrayal, right? If you have your daughter or your child, and then you actually have a connection of an inappropriate sexual nature with with one of your child's friends. So that's kind of shocking in this particular case.
Yeah, and then even just in the police documents saying that she once was the chaperone to a dance, allegedly, that her daughter and this victim, that they went as dates. It's just there's a lot to unpack there. I think from a legal standpoint, because it seems like from what we know that the state, they have a lot of evidence that it seems like a strong case, at least at this point. What is a defense attorney's approach if you're defending a person like this? How do you approach a case where, for example, there is this baby and the DNA shows who the parents are?
Yeah, so in this particular case, I don't want to not to be a wet blanket on the defense, and I've practiced criminal defense for over 30 years. This particular case is unusually hard to defend just because you have DNA confirmation of the child and both parents pointing to both of the persons who have been alleged to be involved with this. So that is a particularly hard thing to overcome when you have and when you have a child survivor or victim. I don't usually like to use the word victim. Survivor is more appropriate, in my opinion. But when you have a DNA confirmation, and then there's no ability for somebody that is 14 years old to consent to have sex with somebody who is the age of the mother in this particular case. And I know that she was at least approximately 20 years older than the young man, and so there's really no ability to give consent. So in this particular case, where you have DNA confirmation and you have text threads back and forth between them, and then you also have some type of photographic evidence, which I'm assuming includes both of them. From some of the articles that I read, it appears that they had recorded some of their physical encounters with one another. That makes this kind of case particularly hard to defend. And as a criminal defense lawyer, as I would be advising a client in this particular circumstance, it would also be more of a matter of how do we mitigate the case with the judge for the sentencing posture, as opposed to how do we go to trial and win this case. Because I think any jury that hears, even a portion of the evidence that has been discussed in the press is going to find that it's going to be very hard to convince a jury that they have the wrong person, right? So the way to win this case is to show that, hey, I'm not the person who actually had sex with this young man. And with the evidence they have, that sounds like that's going to be an insurmountable hurdle to get over.
What is that conversation like? How soon is that conversation with a client where maybe they in their own mind, and I don't know Robyn Polston, but maybe there's something in her mind where she doesn't think that she is as guilty as what's been alleged says? I mean, how soon is the conversation, the real client to lawyer conversation of this may not be about getting a not guilty, this is about seeing that you don't go to jail for the rest of your life?
Right. And so, every lawyer has their different style of practice with that. I tend to be very upfront with clients when I meet with them. I don't do criminal defense very much now, since my main focus is on representing survivors of childhood or adult sexual abuse. But the kind of conversation that you have with the client starts the day they come in the office when you find out the facts. You will have done some due diligence. You'll have usually read the articles. Quite frequently, you'll have a copy of the police report or the criminal affidavit, in this particular case, which I think has been made public. And you'll say, hey, listen, this looks to be what the evidence is. And then you have a conversation about, what is your theory, client, on how we could possibly go to trial and win this case? And that is kind of almost a rhetorical question, because I already know the answer because I've seen the evidence, but I want to see what the client's attitude is. And in this kind of case where you have almost overwhelming evidence, it's going to be a conversation about, this is the evidence against you. You have a choice to make. Do you want to go down a path towards trial, or do you want to go down a path towards some type of negotiated plea? And if you're going down a path for a negotiated plea bargain, here's what the potential outcomes might be. That choice is always up to the client. I've had plenty of clients in my career where we've had overwhelming evidence, just insurmountable, overwhelming documentary, photographic evidence, and the client has still exercised their constitutional right to go to trial. That's always the client's right to make that choice. So the lawyer doesn't make the decision for the client, but the lawyer needs to, if they're doing their job right, let the client know what the likelihood of particular outcomes are, which, in this case, if she decides to go to trial, there could be a guilty verdict with a sentencing to follow. There could be a not guilty verdict, which wouldn't appear very likely in this case, or there could be some type of mistrial. The other way that a case like this could go, let's say, for instance, there was some type of um, misstep by the police department in gathering the documentary evidence. Let's say there was some type of warrant issue and they didn't get a warrant appropriately when they seized their phones, or they didn't Mirandize the accused defendant when she gave a statement. If the lawyer was able to find a way that there was some type of Fourth Amendment violation or some other type of constitutional violation where there could be some evidence excluded, that could go to the decision-making process that the client has to engage in about whether they want to enter a plea or whether they want to go to trial.
It seems like because she's alleged to have had this baby in January of this year, just through, anybody who searches this case on Facebook, you'll see people who were in April talking about why wasn't this woman arrested, and there was a lot of criticism of the local DA and the police for not acting sooner, because there was just at that point local rumor that she had allegedly done this. She isn't arrested until November. November 3rd is when she was arrested. What do you make of the timeline that this baby was born in January? According to police reports, they started to get wind of what was happening in February, and it wasn't until November that she was actually taken into custody.
Yeah, so there could be some very simple explanations for that trajectory of time. The main state where I practice in is Florida, but I'm also licensed in Mississippi, Alabama, and DC. And each one of those states has issues with their crime lab. I know that there was a DNA sample taken in this case. In order to get the DNA sample, you have to have a police officer that goes to a judge, or a police officer that goes to the state attorney and says, hey, we need to apply for a warrant. And so there's the time that it takes to get to a judge, to get them to sign a warrant, to take DNA samples. And apparently, from what I understand from reading up about this case, is they took a DNA sample from the baby and the mother and the survivor child. And so they had to get 3 DNA samples. Depending on the backlog at the state crime lab, or maybe an outside third-party private service that they may have used to do the DNA samples, that can take weeks and weeks. And so I have seen backlogs in state crime labs that can last months to get results. So it could be something as simple as they had to get the DNA samples done, they had to get warrants, and they were investigating by interviewing witnesses. Also, when law enforcement seizes a cell phone or a computer, sometimes the diagnostics and the forensics on electronic devices like computers or phones can take weeks also. So it could just have been a matter of it took a while to get all of the evidence together.
When it comes to sex abuse cases like this, and we've covered a lot of cases, for example, where you might have a teacher who ends up sexually abusing a student. In this case, you have a woman in her 40s accused of sexually abusing and then getting pregnant with a 14-year-old. I don't know what was going through this woman's mind. I don't know much about her personally other than what's been reported to this point. But typically, what is the dynamic where it gets to a place where something like this can actually happen?
Yeah, and so I can tell you in my career, I have represented several women who have been accused of abusing underage males, and without fail, and I know this is anecdotal, but in every single case that I have seen, and I don't know anything about this case, right? I don't know anything about the defendant's background in this case, but in every case that I've seen, the person who has been accused of abusing the child has their own history, sometimes very serious history of being sexually abused themselves. And that's a common theme throughout the world of sex assault. And you find that there's a very high percentage of perpetrators who are themselves victims of sexual abuse as a child or an adult. So that's not something to excuse the conduct, because this type of conduct, Chris, right, is completely inexcusable. There's never a circumstance where it's appropriate to have any type of sexual relations with anybody that is underage. But it does give some insight as to why the conduct happened. I can give you an example. I represented a teacher in one of the states where I'm admitted to practice, and she had had a long-term sexual relationship with a student, and that individual ended up having a significant history of having been abused. And when you go in front of a judge and you say, Judge, it doesn't excuse the conduct, but here's an explanation as to why my client might have some type of issues or unresolved trauma that has resulted in them having this particular proclivity. Here is at least some background as to why it has happened. Here is the science, and here's the research, and here's the studies showing that children who have been abused themselves have a higher percentage of becoming abusers in the future. It does make it at least a little bit more understandable, and there may be an element of a sympathy that a judge might take into consideration as to why this person has these particular sexual deviant interests.
And then when I think of the 14-year-old in this case, who is at 14, allegedly the father of a baby that's now almost 1 year old, has been through, allegedly, an incredibly traumatic experience. You work with survivors of sexual abuse. I mean, what type of, and we don't know much about him at this point, and hopefully his identity just remains private, because it's a battle that he's going to be going through. But I mean, what does the road ahead look like for someone who has been through what police are alleging this 14-year-old has been through?
Yeah, so hopefully the parents of the father survivor in this case are going to engage him in some type of therapy immediately, because that is something that, even though he may not, I have seen circumstances before, especially where it has been a female adult having inappropriate sexual relationships with a male child, where in real time the male child feels like he's, you know, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost feels like it's okay. And I've had a case before where I've had a young male who was having a relationship with a very much older woman. He was under 16, and he showed his friends pictures of them together, and stories of them high-fiving in the hallway, that he was having a sexual relationship with a much older woman, and almost as if it was a degree of conquest for him, to be having sex with an older woman. But we also know as adults that that type of conduct is inappropriate. And so even though the child may feel not victimized at that age for whatever reason, I think that they probably actually will at some point be impacted by that relationship that's age inappropriate. And so my hope would be for the child in this case is that his family get him engaged in therapy to start processing, what has happened, even if he may not fully understand the depth of what has happened that may shape his future.
And I saw there was one, comment from someone in the community in Washington, Illinois. This was from back in April, when it was really just, we knew police were investigating, but they hadn't made, any sort of action to take Robyn Polston into custody. And part of what that person wrote was, well, if roles were reversed, the predator would already be behind bars. If it was a man who, and the survivor in that case was a female. And I think a lot of people publicly would look and agree, just the perception of it. Having practiced in this space, is there any reality to that? The whole role reversal, that suddenly the investigation would have moved quicker at that point and he would have been put behind bars?
Couple of things about that issue, because it's something I've actually studied significantly, just because of some of my past criminal cases. There is, whether it's right or wrong, I'm not here to discuss whether it's right or wrong, but there is a perceived difference in dynamic if the victim is a boy versus if the victim is a girl. And so in one of the cases that I had, where there was an older woman who had a sexually inappropriate relationship with a minor boy, I actually did a case study in the state where where I was handling the criminal case, and I did a study to compare the sentences that were received by males who sexually abused a female child versus the sentences that were imposed by courts in instances where the adult was a woman and the child was a boy. And there was a pretty significant disparity, and there is some type of societal difference between those two situations where the adult is a male versus a female. And so I kind of agree with you that if the perpetrator was a male, there may have been different treatment. But like I said, the treatment could be explained simply by time lags in evidence processing. But there usually will be more of a public revulsion to a male perpetrator versus a female perpetrator.
Yeah, and we'll see how this case plays out. Still very early, but some incredibly shocking allegations coming out of Illinois. Chris Klotz, survivors' rights attorney. It's great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for walking through this case with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me anytime.
Polston is next expected in court on December 4th and will remain in jail until then. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.